can still view. Now check that guided button so that you can keep going because we don't want anyone to leave our meeting. So those who cannot be with us today and still enjoy our program later on the AARP YouTube channel. So check guided when you receive it, when it appears on your screen. Now, if you're not familiar with AARP, AARP is the nation's largest nonprofit, nonpartisan organization dedicated to empowering people to choose how they live as they age. With nearly 38 million members, AARP works to strengthen communities and advocate what matters most, with a focus on health security, financial resilience, and social connection. Today's program focuses on livable communities, an important part of AARP's social change. Who is in the audience today, Jacqueline? Tell us, who do you see? I see a couple of people in there, Jacqueline. Who else do you see?
Jacqueline, I think you're muted. All right. Well, let's take it from here. Let's see who we see in the chat. Let's see. We have Carol from Grand Terrace, California. We have Andrea from Reno, Nevada. We have Carolyn from Dublin, California. We have someone from a lady named Rainey from Jacksonville, Florida. We have Delise from Durham, North Carolina. Wow, we have people from everywhere. We have somebody from Texas, from Oceanside, California, Kinnick, Washington. Renee, wow, okay, this is awesome. All right now.
So exciting. I'm so glad to see all of you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Atisha, for doing that shout out. It's absolutely wonderful. So we're delighted to have all of you join us today and hope you have your coffee, tea, and other beverages with you. We are so excited to share with you Herb Your Enthusiasm container gardening. And as you see, I got some little plants right here. To get us warmed up today, we have 2 poll questions and ask you to quickly submit your answers. Poll number 1. What are the top 2 herbs you most likely to grow at home? Is it basil, oregano, rosemary, mint, sage, or parsley? I know we got some good cooks out there, so come on, tell us what it is. So far, basil's looking good. Rosemary is coming up in a close second. And parsley is coming up on his third, but that's okay. Parsley and rosemary are kind of neck to neck. So thank you so much. I can see we have a lot of good cooks out there. Okay, boy, basil definitely is number 1. Rosemary and parsley. Again, thank you so much. Let's do poll number 2. And poll number 2 would be, do you feel comfortable repotting plants? Oh, it's a lot of yeses coming in. I had a hard time trying to do this one, but I don't know about you guys. It's a lot of yeses coming in. You feel really comfortable in repotting plants? Not too many no's. Well, that's very good. I am glad that everyone that I can see, there's a good majority, 75% of you is so excited to do that one. So that's absolutely wonderful. Thank you so very much. So back by popular demand, it's my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker who is a master gardener, Sara June. Sara June is a UC master gardener in Southern California. She grew up enjoying the abundance of her grandmother's garden. and she has been working on growing her own organic foods ever since. So, after learning about how compost can rebuild eroded topsoil and capture the carbon from the atmosphere, she decided to enter the UC Master Gardening Program to learn more and to share her knowledge with her community. She loves growing herbs, tomatoes, fruits, and California native plants. As a reminder, put your questions in for Sara June in the chat during the program, and she will definitely answer all of your questions at the end of the program. Now, as per our tradition, with some spice to the introduction and some fun facts, here is something about Sara June you may not know. The most popular herb in the world is cilantro. In cooking, generally speaking, herbs refer to leaves and stems, while spices can be seeds, fruits, berries, bark, root, buds, petals, or flowers. Whew, there's a lot going on. Sarah's favorite type is Parisian basil, which has a green and purple leaf and a slight citrusy taste. Her favorite way to consume mint is the strong tea sweetener with honey. Welcome, Sara. Sara, we're ready when you are.
Thank you so much, Joyce. Wow, it is great to be back at Tea and Coffee Tuesdays. I have got my Tea and Coffee Tuesdays mug official. So last time we had so many great questions, and I think we didn't quite have enough time for questions. So we're going to have a little bit more time today. I have a hard end at it's 9:08 for me right now. At 9:40, we're going to start taking questions. And today I'm going to be talking a little bit more about container planting in general, as opposed to just growing herbs. A lot of the information is going to be the same, of course, because herbs are plants. But I'm going to be able to go a little bit deeper into general container planting. And please forgive my voice. I'm getting over a little cold. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Just one second so you can see. Okay. And I'm going to slideshow. Okay, great. So just turn off a couple of these notifications. So today we're going to talk about container planting at home. That is the first slide. Okay, so the first thing to think about with container planting, which is, I think most people don't have yards. Most people live in apartments or small homes with little patios, or maybe a yard that's not quite big enough to walk around in, but not quite big enough to put landscaping in. So container planting is extremely popular and very common. And just like with planting in the ground, one of the first things you want to think about with your container planting is finding your zone. Even if you're growing plants inside, the weather outside is affecting them. So there is a very easy way to find your growing zone, and it is to go to this URL, which I've put on the slide here, and which we're going to drop in the chat, so you can very easily find your zone. These zones are changing very slightly every year due to climate change. So if you think you know your zone, it might be good to double check. Personally, I am in one of the warmest zones in the United States of America. I am in zone 10B. So I can grow a lot of stuff that people in the north can't grow. However, people in the north can certainly grow broccoli in March without it having to go to flower almost immediately, like I do. So I have a very different grow zone than anybody up in North Dakota or Minnesota or even, Colorado. So it's really important to know your zone, not just to know what kinds of plants will do well in your climate, but also to know which of your plants can overwinter. As I talked about in the herb presentation, herbs are annuals. Most herbs are annuals, meaning that they will the whole plant will die in the winter, and in the spring it grows again from seed. You are not doing anything wrong when your herbs die in the winter. That's just how they live. However, in a zone like mine, a very warm zone, it is actually possible to keep a basil plant alive through the winter, it will not be producing a lot of leaves, but it will stay alive, and then in the spring it'll grow again. But in general, most herbs are annuals. You will have to reseed them every year. If you are growing other types of plants that are perennials, they may die back during their dormant season, meaning like the leaves will die, but the roots will stay alive. And then in the spring, they'll grow again. The nice thing about container plants is that you can move them inside when it gets too cold, and you can move them outside when it starts to get warm again. I'm sure some of you have experience doing this with citrus trees. That's something where, again, here in zone 10B, you could keep your citrus tree out all the time. But if we have a freak frost, all the citrus trees are dead. So if you have like a potted orange tree or lemon tree, which you can absolutely do and get fruit from, if you live in a colder zone where you regularly expect frosts every year, you can just move that plant inside. This is also really common with like avocado trees that are in pots. So finding your zone is the perfect place to start. A really common phrase in landscaping is right plant, right place. And it really addresses a lot in just 4 words: right plant, right place. And this applies even when it comes to container plants. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in just a couple of slides. So the first stop, where to buy plants. I personally really enjoy growing plants from seed. I find it really rewarding, and overall it tends to be cheaper. However, it's a little tricky. Depending on your grow zone, you might need special equipment like a grow light or seed starting mix. If you don't want to do that, I completely understand. And you could just buy seedlings. I prefer local nurseries over big box stores, but whatever is available to you is good. If you have a neighbor that has plants, that's a great place to start. You can propagate cuttings from their plants. There are a lot of plants that will grow if you take a cutting and then you can root it in water, or you can get rooting powder for other types of plants. And then you take a cutting, you dip the end in the rooting powder, and then you put it in the ground, and that it has a hormone on it that helps it root. So if you're looking for a plant at the store, a great place to start is obviously by looking at the leaves. You want a plant that doesn't have yellow or brown leaves. You want a plant that doesn't have what's called leggy growth, which is when there is like a lot of space on the stem between leaf nodes, because that indicates that the plant has been grown in sunlight that is not sufficient for its needs, and it's been stretching to receive the light. So yeah, you want a plant that has a strong stem, green leaves, and if you are checking the roots, you want to make sure that they are light colored and healthy, and we'll go a little bit more into what to look for with roots later. Picking your container is very, very important. And the main thing to keep in mind with picking your container is considering your need for water retention. I'm in a very dry climate, so for me, I tend to go for glazed clay over unglazed clay, because unglazed clay is porous and emits more water, has better drainage. If you live in a climate with a lot of rainfall, then unglazed clay might be the perfect solution for you, so that your plants don't get wet feet, as they say, where their roots stay soggy because it doesn't have enough drainage. So here on the left, you can see an example of a really water efficient container. This is a plastic container with a plastic cover on the top, and that helps water escape. That keeps water from escaping through the top. And then, of course, the plastic is completely not draining. There is a little drainage hole here, but so this is for a really dry and hot climate where you want to conserve as much water as possible, and your plants are going to want to hang on to every drop of water that's in the soil. This middle one and the one on the right, you can see that this one in the middle is unglazed clay, which is allowing for more transpiration, and then the wood also allows for more drainage. So it's just about your needs. Growing in containers does not have to always mean growing in a cute little pink pot like this one on the left. You can grow in a plastic bucket. You can grow in an old soda bottle. You can grow plants in a lot of things. But I will give the same note on upcycling that I did before, which is up over here on the right, we have some plants in little metal containers, and they look very cute, and I like them a lot. But those containers are going to rust. and the bottom of the containers are going to rust because they are metal that has not been treated to take water. So I've done this many times. I've planted plants in old soup cans and things like that. Generally, the issue with planting in metal is, number one, the heat. I was in a very hot area, and so it ended up not being just way too hot for the plants. And then the other one is they rust. And so the rust is not really a problem for the plant so much as it is for the surface that you are putting your container on. I'm looking at this picture and thinking about how this lady, I'm assuming a lady, is going to have some little rusty squares to clean off her windowsill, and that's going to be unpleasant. So I prefer to go for plastic, wood, clay, or over metal. So what to look for in soil. If you're container planting, generally you're going to be getting your soil at the store in a bag. A lot of, I know my city at least has some giveaways and things like that where there's like industrial citywide compost. And sometimes you can get free soil from there. But what to look for in soil. Not every plant needs soil that is packed with nutrients. If you are planting herbs or native plants, both of which are excellent things to grow alongside any other plants that you might want, some of them are very tolerant of what we tend to call poor soil. Some of them even prefer poor soil. Poor soil, as it is used in gardening, kind of means soil that does not have high levels of nitrogen, potassium, and well, we'll go into that more a little bit later. But basically, if you need to enrich your soil, there are a number of organic amendments that you can use. And you can create a soil mix that is right for your plant's needs. If you have a plant that needs a lot of drainage, a plant that prefers loose or sandy soils, you're going to want to perhaps add to either use a soil mix labeled something like cactus mix, or sometimes it'll say native soil mix, although that's kind of a meaningless term because native soil is different everywhere. But something called cactus mix is generally potting soil that has a number of drainage amendments added. So it has vermiculite, which is just like little stones, or coarse sand, also basically little stones. And what that does is it helps your soil drain faster. So again, if you live in a wet climate and you're trying to grow something like a cactus in a pot, you're going to want to make sure that you amend the soil or buy a specific type of soil for that plant's water needs. Then again, you might be like me, trying to grow ginger in a pot here in a very hot, dry place. And in that case, you're going to want to amend the soil with something that will retain water. One of the best ways to retain water is just to add mulch, to add a layer of mulch on the top of your container. I highly recommend that. But if you also need the soil itself to retain a lot of water for a long time, peat moss is a great amendment for that. And peat moss, I kind of hesitate to recommend it for as like a first choice because it is a finite natural resource. It is mined from I say mined, but it is moss. But it is moss that is mined, and it is not. It grows very slowly. It is not particularly renewable. So a great way to retain water in your soil without using peat moss is to use any kind of mulch. Wood chips is good. Straw, even like gravel, light stone can be a great mulch. So thinking about your plant's water needs and how they take up water, which is through their roots. So this is one of the main things that I think people have a hard time with container plants, because especially if you're buying seedlings, this is the part of the plant that takes place under the soil. We're not able to see all of this stuff all the time, but the roots are an incredible tell of a plant's health. And often when your plant is having some kind of a problem and you can't figure out what it is, the answer may lie in the roots. So a healthy root, the number one thing to look for is a light coloring. Healthy roots are light colored. They're not slimy, they're not smelly, and they have a fairly regular shape, a fairly regular branching shape. An unhealthy root, as you can see here on the right, will have like a more crooked or twisted shape. And if a root is at all slimy or smelly, that is an unhealthy root that is rotting. And dark roots are also a really good sign that the root is not healthy. Here we have an example of a root-bound plant on the right. So the plant on the left has very healthy roots, and you can tell because they are light colored. They are growing. These plants have both just been taken out of very similar pots. And you can see that the one on the right has, number one, lots of small roots. That's a really good sign of root health, is when your roots have lots of little fingers coming off of them. And so you can see there's tons of little ones here, and they're growing all the way out to the side of the pot. The one on the right, the reason that it is not healthy is, number one, it has fewer roots. The roots are darker in color, and you can see that some of them are kind of reddish. And most importantly, it has, cutting right across it here through the middle horizontally, a big root spiraling around the inside of the container. That is called root bound. If you've ever heard this term root bound, that's what that means. It's when the plant's roots grow and start tying a noose around themselves, essentially. And what that means is, if you try to, number one, that plant will just choke itself out. And if you try to plant it in the ground, the roots will not, they're not going down like they should be. And they're not going down and out like they should be. They're going around. They've started choking themselves. So if you plant this in a larger pot or in the ground, that plant is probably just going to die. So when you are looking for seedlings at the store, generally the seedlings don't really get root bound, but that's something to check for when you're buying a plant of any kind at the store. I would say a seedling or a larger plant even. Okay, moving right along. Identifying root rot. Again, this is another picture of this plant on the left has healthy roots. You can see they're light colored. They're in a pretty regular branching shape. And then these two on the right, you can see the dark color is the main tell. And another tell is just that they don't have as many roots. And their roots are, they're reaching down quite far, but they are not branching. So the reason I wanted to show you guys this picture is, imagine that you are just take your hand and cover up the roots and look at the picture, and you're looking at this plant and you're like, okay, the leaves look bad. The leaves are brown. It looks unhappy, looks kind of sick, but what is it, you know? And I think a lot of the time when people have problems with their plants, that they notice the symptoms of those problems in the leaves, but the root of the problem is in the roots. So that's something to think about. Okay, providing sunlight. Again, the great thing about container plants is you can move them, but especially if you have a large container plant, you're not going to want to move it all that much. So I think this is one great advantage of container plants is if you put it somewhere and it's not doing well, you can put it somewhere else and see if it likes it there better. So this is a really cool diagram of something I'm obsessed with, which is the sun orientation of one's home. And this is a diagram sort of highlighting how the sun affects the shade in your home, but this also relates to where you are putting your plant. Now, most people are putting their plant in or near a window. Awesome. That's where sunlight comes from. It is, however, not going to be the same every day. As you can see in this diagram, the path of the sun in winter is very different from the path of the sun in summer. So this might mean that your plant is getting a great amount of sun in the summer, but in the winter is basically getting zero sun. So this is a really cool thing to do to figure out your home's sun orientation and how much light is coming in through each of your windows at different times of year, because it is extremely different. So especially if you have a plant that is right by a window, great to find out whether it has the right amount of light year round, or if you need to move it seasonally. Another way to provide light is grow lights. They are not just for growing marijuana indoors. They work on any plant. You can buy grow lights that are very large, like this one in the middle, or you can buy grow lights that are very small, like this one on the right, which is just a little clip-on. I really like grow lights, especially as somebody who has grown plants in apartments a lot. It's just not a lot of light. It's not a lot of direct sunlight. It's often not enough for plants. Plants need sunlight. And also, if you have a plant in a window, you'll find it growing towards the window all the time. So I really like to use grow lights as a way to supplement natural light. Unless you're trying to grow fruit inside, as when I say fruit, I mean like any fruit or vegetable that has a fruiting body, like this tomato here in the middle. It takes a huge amount of power to grow these. It takes a huge amount of sunlight to grow food. It takes a huge amount of power to mimic that with artificial light. I don't recommend doing that, but I do recommend getting a grow light to supplement the sunlight that your plant is getting. One thing you can see here on the left is this is a vertical grow light. It's not above them, it's on the side, because these people are growing these plants in a tower. So that's one really cool thing about grow lights is you can arrange them vertically, you can arrange them horizontally, you can put them wherever you need to direct your plant's growth. So yeah, if you have a plant in a window that's just growing towards the window, obviously turning it intermittently is a great way to maintain even growth, but you can also put a little grow light on the other side. All right, companion planting. This is also something we talked about when it came to herbs, because they are so wonderful for companion planting. Plants have relationships. They ingest and excrete different chemicals into the soil. And so many plants benefit from being around each other. Some plants do not benefit from being around each other. Companion planting is an extremely powerful way to keep pests and disease away from your plants. And I think this is something that you're especially prone to when it comes to container plants. And that is because of the way that soil holds water and how much pests love water. So this is an example of companion planting that is difficult to do in a container, but it's just a very famous example of companion planting is the Three Sisters method. This was a really common companion planting technique used all over the Americas. And it is where you plant corn, beans, and squash together, because corn needs a lot of nitrogen, beans put a lot of nitrogen into the soil, and squash takes other stuff out of the soil. They grow at different levels. The corn grows very high. The beans spiral up the corn. They use the corn as a support, and then squash covers the ground with leaves, shading the soil. So this is one very, very famous method, and you can do it with herbs on a smaller scale. This is a little rundown of various herbs and the ways that they can repel different pests. I think that this is a great way to control the kinds of pests that you tend to get with indoor container plants, such as ants, whiteflies, and spider mites. And I recommend screenshotting this image, or this recording will be available later, so you can always return to it. Peas and beans in general are a great thing to grow alongside anything. Even if you're growing in a container and your peas and beans are never going to produce peas and beans, they are very beneficial for the soil. They put a lot of nutrients into the soil. So it's great to just sow peas or beans of any type along with whatever you're planting. Here's a little example of a companion planting that you could do in a warm season in a very large container. You could put a tomato in the middle, basil and pepper and parsley and cilantro around it. Obviously, all these things taste amazing together, and they grow really well together and keep pests away. And then over here, we've got corn, squash, peas, sage, and beans, and dill. So this is a warm season example. Here's a cool season example. Cauliflower with dill, kale, thyme, and chamomile. Kale and cauliflower, being cabbages, tend to attract cabbage worms. Dill and thyme help keep these away. Carrots love rosemary. Carrots love sage. Celery leeks. They're very happy together. Also, in general, I find people tend to be worried about overcrowding more than they really need to be. What happens with a container is that your plant's root growth is limited, and that limits the size that your plant can grow to. You only need to, if your plant has grown to a place where the roots are like fully taking over the container, you have two options. You can put the plant in a larger container where its roots can then get bigger, and both below ground and above ground it'll get bigger, or you can trim the roots to keep it in the same size pot. You don't have to make your plant bigger. I think this is something people kind of assume is like you have to make your plant bigger, but you don't. You can keep it in a small pot if you're like, I don't want to get a bigger pot. That's heavy. I don't want to carry that around. You know, you can keep it small. It's totally fine. Okay. Running out of time. All right. Watering and fertilizing. These are some watering methods that you can use in containers. One thing I love to do in containers is use this buried clay pot method. These buried clay pots are called, they're also called oyas, and it's just an unglazed clay pot. You fill it with water. The unglazed clay is porous and it leaches water into the soil steadily and at a low flow rate. It's an extremely water efficient way to water. You could also do this pot and wick, where basically you have a reservoir of soil and you have like a piece of cotton rope that goes into the soil and it wicks up the water from below. And this is a really great way to get rid of pests like fungus gnats that tend to come when you have damp soil at the top. They love damp soil where oxygen is available to them. And so when you bottom water, you make it harder for those pests to take root. This is another way to do that, a less passive way, a way that requires you to do a little bit more active, but I highly recommend this method. So when you water your soil, the water is applying pressure to the soil. And when you only water from above, what happens is over time, your soil compresses and becomes no longer able to take in water. This is a state called hydrophobia, afraid of water. And what it means is if you've ever noticed that you water a plant and none of the water soaks in and it all just kind of comes out the bottom and it doesn't look like any of the soil has absorbed water, that is a hydrophobic soil. Now, one great way to avoid that problem is to use alternative watering methods that do not involve surface watering, such as these buried clay pots, the wick, or in this case, bottom watering. And that's just where you take your plant and you sit it in a little bowl of water. You fill up the bowl about halfway, you sit the plant in it, let it sit overnight or for a few hours, let it drain. And over that time, it will really help rehydrate the soil. If you have truly hydrophobic soil, you should just repot. But if you don't have hydrophobic soil, this is a great way to prevent that state. Pinching and pruning for growth. Plants love it when you eat little bits of them. That's kind of how they were evolved, is to be nibbled on constantly. So we're going to talk a little bit about pinching and pruning to create growth, which is not just something that you do with trees, but also with plants. So at the tip of a plant is something called the apical meristem. This is an area of the plant with specialized cells to create things like buds, blossoms, and fruit. It is evolved so that when you pinch off the top of the plant, when you remove that area, the area beneath it has special cells to basically come in and take its place. What that means is when you cut off just the top of the plant, you initiate plant's growth of 2 new growth stems just underneath that area. Now, you do have to make sure that you cut it in the right place. So this picture of this basil here on the left shows us where is a great place to pinch. Where the leaves come off the sides of the stem is called a growth node, because in that area just between them, there is a special group of cells to produce leaves and not just more stem. So what you want to do is cut the plant between growth nodes, ideally about an inch above or below a growth node. So this basil on the left shows us pinch here in the bit of stem between 2 growth nodes. And you can already see how in the growth node underneath where it says to pinch, there are already new branches forming. So if you pinch this basil right here, those new branches will be motivated to then become full leaves. And here is another way to think about it, which is pinching and pruning for blossoms. If you have a plant that you want to flower a lot, especially if it's a fruit producing plant, you want it to flower, because that's what becomes fruit. This diagram shows you how you can take a plant that has one stem, pinch it, and it'll grow into two. And then you pinch each of those and they'll grow into 3 and 4. And so from a 1-stemmed plant, now you have an 8-stemmed plant. And at the end of each of those stems is a blossom. So this is the basic math behind pinching and pruning. You are removing to initiate double growth, which then at the end of each of those growths has something you want, whether it's a blossom that will become a fruit or just more leaves for you to eat. So this is one thing I've noticed a lot with container planting and indoor planting is people are kind of scared to harvest their plants. But if you have an edible plant, number one, you got to eat. And number two, it helps the plant to grow. Okay. Let's see. 3 more minutes. Okay. All right. All right. We're just going to talk about fertilizer for 3 minutes because it's extremely important. Plants need food. They cannot just live on sunlight and water. They need food and they love to eat things that are dead. I'm sorry, but it's true. We're going to talk for just 1 minute about NPK because when you buy a fertilizer, it has 3 numbers on it. What are those numbers? They're NPK. N, nitrogen, P, phosphorus, K, potassium. This little graphic here shows us what each of those will lead to. And the reason that it's important to know this is different plants, different needs, and different purposes. If you have a plant that you just want to have healthy foliage, you want a fertilizer with more nitrogen, and it doesn't have to have so much phosphorus or potassium. However, if you're trying to grow a tomato plant, for example, and you're like, I want tomatoes, you need to make sure that your fertilizer has enough phosphorus for it to make blooms, because that is what's going to become tomatoes. Most fertilizers are chemically derived, meaning they are derived from petroleum. They are extremely unsustainable, and they will give your plants a real boost of energy, like generally a lot of nitrogen. You'll see like a lot of growth, but they don't last in the soil for very long. They wash out. So for this reason, I recommend that you use other kinds of fertilizers as they are available to you, anything fish or seaweed based, bone or blood meal, guano, etc. You can buy a lot of these in powdered forms that are not smelly. I know almost all container planting is taking place indoors. I totally get it. Making fertilizer. You can save incredible amounts of money by making your own fertilizer. It is, however, stinky. But if you have a place where you can have a stinky bucket of water, you can make incredibly strong fertilizer for literally cents. You can use a method developed in Korean natural farming called Jadam liquid fertilizer, which is basically where you take a bunch of weeds or whatever and you put them in a bucket, you add a little salt and some potatoes, and a few weeks later you have some of the craziest, strongest fertilizer. You dilute this by 100. So you make 1 bucket and you can use that for a year. Something delicate, diluted urea. Plants love to drink your pee. They love it. They just want you to dilute it by about 10 parts water. If you're in a place where you can do this, if you have patio plants, that's liquid gold. You can give your plants your urine and they absolutely love it. You will see incredible results. I am being completely serious about this. If you can do it, do it. It's free. And the last and one very smell-free way to create your own very cheap fertilizer is vermicompost, worm composting. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this. There's a book I really recommend called Worms Eat My Garbage, which is an extremely popular book, like from the 70s. Everything in it is still right on point. Over here on the left, we have an illustration of kind of a fancy worm composter. I have a fancy worm composter like this because I have the space to put it outside, and so I can put a large number in it. However, you can have really small worm composting. The thing about worms is people think they eat rotting foods. They don't eat rotting foods. They eat soft foods because they don't have teeth. So if you can feed worms fresh foods, as long as they are chopped up. One thing, I actually have a friend who would save their food scraps in the freezer, and then once they had a bag full, would pulverize it in the blender, and then they would just pour it into the soil of they would dig a little trench in the garden, pour it in the soil, and the worms went absolutely nuts for it. They loved it. Worms love smoothies, essentially. So if you can chop up food or smoothie fresh food, you can feed that to worms and they will eat it. It will not even have time to rot. Worms are something you can keep indoors. I know that's a weird feeling for a lot of people, but I personally think they're very cute. And if you have outdoor space, it's very nice. Last thing, pollinators. Okay, I'm past my time, but if you have a plant that you want to produce fruit, it needs to be pollinated. Normally, this work is done for us by bees and butterflies. If your plant is indoors, you must hand pollinate if you would like to produce fruit. Okay, here's some stuff about saving seed. This was also in the last presentation, and here's a little mint lemonade recipe, and now we'll get to questions.
Wow, Sarah, that was so great. Very informative. And now I'm so eager to start my gardening. I have little plants, but now I want to do some gardening. So, Jacqueline, okay, it's question time. What do you see in the questions box for us?
Well, Joyce, we have a ton of questions today.
Yes.
Okay. Says compost is hard to find. What additives can he add? Is it true you can put eggshells in coffee? Are they good to help with compost?
Yes, I'm sorry. Is the question, can you put eggshells in coffee in compost, or can you put eggshells in coffee in your plant's soil?
Plant source.
You can, well, so it depends on the plant. Eggshells are a great source of calcium, and coffee grounds are a great source of nitrogen. If your plant needs more nitrogen or needs soil that is more acidic, then yes, you can put coffee grounds straight into or onto the soil. Whenever it comes to adding things to soil, digging it in a little bit is always better than just putting it on the top. However, if your plant doesn't like acid soil, then it is going to be very unhappy with the coffee grounds. I am growing blueberries in a container, for example. Blueberries need extremely acidic soil because their native area is they grow around pine trees. Pine trees drop their needles. These needles are highly acidic. Blueberries need very acid soil. If you grow azaleas or citrus, they also like acid soil. So I would say if you're going to add coffee grounds to your container plants, make sure that the plant likes acidic soil and maybe invest in little pH test strips so you can make sure that you're not exceeding the pH that your plant enjoys. But I think eggshells, washed out dried eggshells are a great idea. Even better if you wash, dry them, and then grind them up. You can do this with a mortar and pestle or with a blender. And that way it'll make those nutrients much more available to your plants. Another great way to do that is if you have the eggshell or the ground up eggshell, you soak it in water and then you water your plant with that and the eggshell bits. And that makes it just makes it easier for the plant to take up those nutrients.
Okay. We have a lot of questions to get through. Kathleen wants to know, can plants grow if they're frostbitten?
It depends on the plant. It really depends on the plant. For example, like hardy cabbages like kale actually will grow when they're frostbitten. Sometimes they even frost makes kale taste sweeter, which is really cool. But it just depends on the plant. Some plants will just die with a frost, like just fully die. So it depends on the plant.
Okay. Amy wants to know, do chemicals from plastic leak into the soil at all, especially if they've been sitting out in the sun all day?
They can. And that's one where, again, it depends on the type of plastic. There are a lot of different types of plastic. There's food grade plastic, there's non-food grade plastic. So for that reason, I think if you were, for example, to grow a plant in like a 2-liter soda bottle, and leave it in the sun, I do think that the plastic, the PFAs would leak into the soil. So I don't recommend that. You can do stuff like use those as cloches for when you need to protect a plant or start a seed or whatever, something where it's not fully in the heat all the time and water's not going through it. Yeah.
Okay. Christina wants to know the best tips for growing tomatoes in outdoor containers in zone 8.
Growing tomatoes in outdoor containers in zone 8. Feed them. Tomatoes are very heavy feeders. They need a lot of They need a lot of nitrogen. They need a lot of phosphorus. I think that's a really common mistake about tomatoes is they are very easy to grow, but they're very heavy feeders. So get that fish emulsion or vermicompost or whatever.
Okay. Arlene wants to know, is ginger able to grow in clay soil?
I don't think so. I think it could, but the main thing is ginger also needs very acidic soil. So clay soil might be okay, but it would have to be the right pH for it. Ginger's tough to grow. There's really nowhere I would say if you live in like the Southeast, that would be the easiest place to grow ginger in America. It's the most tropical type of conditions.
Okay. And one of our Facebook attendees wants to know, is there a way to prevent herbs from growing wild and spreading all over everywhere, such as oregano and thyme? They grow way for them.
For like outdoors?
They didn't say, but I'm assuming. Yeah.
Well, basically, it sounds like for you, these herbs are essentially a weed. They're a plant growing in a place where you don't want them to grow. And so I would recommend basically the same weed control methods that I recommend for any other type of weed, which is either like to chop and drop early in the season before they have started flowering and producing seed, and then to cover them. A really, really effective but slow way to kill weeds is to cover them with a big piece of cardboard so that they can't have light, and to keep that on there for about a year. You can also do something called solarizing, which is when you cover it with a piece of clear plastic. If you live in a hot place, which I do, this is a great way to kill weeds and any weed seeds that are in the soil. You cut the plant, as close to the root as you can, maybe even pull it up, whatever you can take out, you take out manually. And then you cover that piece of soil with a piece of thick, clear plastic, and attach it down along the sides, and you leave that for a year. And what that does is it makes the soil so hot in the midsummer that it kills any weed seeds that are in the soil. And so, and if you live in a place where it's not so hot, you could accomplish basically the same thing by smothering the plant with, a few layers of cardboard or like a big piece of canvas.
Okay. Annette wants to know, is it okay to reuse the dirt in a container?
It is. There are a couple of risk factors with reusing the dirt in a container. One is that there might be some kind of a pest that has laid eggs in your dirt. So if you are repotting because of a pest problem, definitely you want new dirt. There is also the risk of bacteria in your container or your soil that could be negatively affecting your plants. And basically, I would say if you are repotting for reasons other than I just want my plant to be in a larger container, don't reuse soil. If you're trying to fix a problem like a pest or a root problem or whatever, it is much better to use fresh soil.
Okay. Ramesh wants to know, should I pinch my tomato plants? Does it delay them getting fruit?
No, it won't delay them getting fruit. You should definitely pinch your tomato plants. They respond extremely well to pinching. And one thing that you can do is with tomato plants is do what's called bud pruning, which is just an advanced version of pinching. It is hard to do, not physically, but emotionally. And what it is basically when you see the buds forming, the first buds on your plant, you pinch them off, and it feels horrible, and it feels like you are killing the plant, and it feels like you are killing a baby. But what happens is it initiates the production of twice as many buds on the plant. And so especially with the tomato, which has a capacity to grow like a large amount of fruit, if you do that, they respond very quickly. Another thing with tomatoes is the pollination. There are a couple of methods of hand pollinating tomatoes that replicate bees and the way that bees move. So I encourage you to look those up online. Hand pollination of tomatoes. You can do it with a paintbrush. You can do it with if you have like a Theragun or something, it is a great way to pollinate your tomatoes.
Okay. Lisa would be interested in knowing some of the sustainable fertilizer options that don't come from animals. Is seaweed okay, or bone blood?
So sustainable fertilizer options that don't come from animals, I would say would be the Jadam liquid fertilizer is the strongest and cheapest plant-based fertilizer that you can get. And one really cool thing about that is that you can make it from weeds. So if you have a plant that so basically any weed that grows is extracting certain nutrients from your soil. And if you take those weeds, the clippings of those weeds, anything above the soil line, and you essentially let it rot in a container with some carbohydrates to feed the microorganisms, what you will get is a fertilizer that is extremely rich in the nutrients that your soil needs, exactly those nutrients that your soil needs, because they have been taken out of the soil by the weeds. And by basically the process of Jadam is essentially quick decomposition. You're quickly decomposing these leaves, and then that's what makes the liquid fertilizer. So yeah, that would be my recommendation.
Okay. So maybe a couple quick ones. Julie wants to know, commercial mulch she purchased last year was black and seemed like it had chemicals in it. She mixed it with soil and her plant died.
I'm sorry.
Fears about that?
A lot of commercial mulch is dyed. That's why mulch comes in different colors, like red mulch and black mulch and brown mulch. They're all just for the most part wood chips, but they're dyed for landscaping. So my personal recommendation for mulch, if you can do it, is like straw. It's like hay. For some plants, like if you're trying to grow cactuses or succulents, one of the best mulches is tiny gravel, pea gravel. Yeah, that's upsetting. I'm sorry that happened to you.
So maybe for the last question, I'm going to combine two. You touched on this a little bit by talking about the lamp. Someone said when you have small patio, limited sun, not a lot of windows, how do you grow a plant? And you touched on that a little bit about the grow lights, but then someone else asked, do the grow lights, the LED grow lights, create a lot of heat? So maybe you could touch on both of those.
The LED grow lights do not create a lot of heat. They're specifically designed to not create a lot of heat because they're supposed to be relatively close to the plants. They do take power. I would say that's the main drawback of LED grow lights. However, if you're in a place where you just don't have the sunlight and you got to have a plant, grow lights are great. And yeah, short answer, they don't produce a lot of heat.
Okay, so the final thing to say is there are a lot of things in the chat asking for the next class and when's the next chance we'll get your presentation. It was wonderful. And Joyce, I'm going to take it back to you because we'll be asking questions all afternoon.
I know. I was trying to follow some of them, and I was trying to take notes where you guys wouldn't see me writing because it was really great information. So thank you again, Sarah.
Of course. Now, can I say one quick thing?
Sure.
If you are in California, you have access to the UC Master Gardener program, and you can ask a Master Gardener any and all questions. There is a hotline. There is an email hotline. You can get into the specifics. You can ask about your specific plants. It's an amazing resource for California gardeners. So please, if you are in California and you want to ask me or other Master Gardeners more questions, please use that resource. We are extremely happy to talk about the nitty-gritty with you.
Well, thanks. Thank you so much again, Sarah. So yeah, we definitely need for you to come back, but that's another topic here. So before we close out, we'd like to take a quick pulse with what our audience has learned. So now it's your chance again to go back to the chat and put in some gardening tips that you would most likely to try. Now I know it's a lot of information, but what are some of the things that you'd like to try? And Jacqueline, would you let me know what's going on? What are they writing?
Right now they're just companion planting, water from below. Definitely that. I picked up on that.
Oh, yes.
Dirt and the Korean natural farming worm composting. Pinching. Those are some of the things they'd like to try.
Those are some of the things I'd like to try. Okay, so thank you so very much. If you're anything like me, you was taking notes, and definitely when you get a chance, you can review this video again. And finally, please let us know how we're doing by filling out our survey. The link is been placed into the chat. Thank you so very much. And that's our link there. So let us know how we're doing. And our next Tea and Coffee Tuesday monthly meeting will be on Tuesday, May the 9th at 9 a.m. Join us for a conversation on caring for your furry family as you age. We would also like to invite you to our quarterly series, Piggy Bank Essentials with Martin, which will be Thursday, May the 25th, 2023 at 9 a.m. as we discuss the gig economy. Thank you so much again, Sarah. So much information. Thank you so much. Our moderator, Jacqueline Cole, our our AARP staff, and especially you, our family members here. Again, my name is Joyce Howard, and thank you for joining us today. And this concludes our program. Have a great day and happy gardening. Bye.
So you know the survey link is in the chat. Please check the chat for the survey link. You'll always also receive an email with the survey link as well.
Thank you.
Can somebody let Priscilla in, please?
Where's Priscilla?
She should be in the waiting room.
I let her in already.
Okay. Can we stop the recording, please, or did you want it to go on, Leticia?
No, I wanted the recording to stop.